On the 11th of March 1991, Richard Grieco walked onto the stage at the 17th Annual People's Choice Awards with the world seemingly at his feet. Grieco was one of the hottest young actors in the world, and the film that was going to catapult him from TV teen heartthrob to full-blown Hollywood A-lister was only 4 days away from release. This was going to be James Bond for the MTV generation. But for Grieco, things didn't exactly end up going to plan. And that was the thing about Hollywood in the 1990s. The potential rewards had never been bigger, but not every film made the grade. For every boom, there were plenty of busts. Today, we're exploring 4 such projects: stalled franchises, new superstar arrivals that never actually arrived, and whatever in the name of Tom Selleck this was exactly. If you could buy shares in an actor, Wall Street would have been all in on Richard Grieco at the start of the 90s. He'd become one of TV's hottest properties alongside Johnny Depp on 21 Jump Street. And now Hollywood was calling, and they were rolling out the red carpet. He was the studio's only choice for his high-profile big screen debut. It was basically an 88-minute commercial for Richard Grieco's future superstardom. And it had a title to match.
Hey, Richard Grieco. No problem. If looks could kill.
They might as well have called it "We think this guy is hot and cool, and you will too." Although, that's maybe not quite as snappy a title. Anyway, the TV actor to movie stardom pipeline had long been an obvious and fruitful one for Hollywood, but it proved particularly strong in the 80s and 90s, from Michael J. Fox to Bruce Willis, and Tom Hanks to Grieco's ex-castmate Johnny Depp, and of course, Tom Selleck to Ted Danson. Legends. Leveraging small screen success to massive big screen careers was something the industry relied upon. It didn't always work out perfectly or sustain itself for the long term, but the hit rate in this era was remarkably high. So when Grieco became a household name thanks to his role as Dennis Booker in 21 Jump Street, and his co-star was starting his journey towards the movie A-list, there could not have been a more obvious choice to follow him. As Grieco's own spin-off show launched on Fox at the end of the 80s, the actor was agreeing the lead on a film that would offer him the perfect opportunity to make that jump. One that Studio Warner Brothers had high hopes for, from a script which had been nearly made years earlier under very different circumstances in the mid-80s. The story of a fish-out-of-water high school spy, teen agent as it was originally called, was envisioned as a sort of James Bond in a John Hughes movie mashup by writer Fred Dekker, with Anthony Michael Hall seen as the ideal choice for the lead. Given that Dekker went on to make The Monster Squad, and Anthony Michael Hall was, well, Anthony Michael Hall, that sounds like it had the potential to be absolutely awesome. But sadly, Teen Agent in its original form ended up going nowhere, something I'm kind of genuinely gutted about. Dekker's concept eventually got the green light in early 1990, although the script had been completely rewritten by Darren Star. Star would become a one-man TV powerhouse before too long, starting with Beverly Hills 90210 later in the year. But as his screenplay went into production at Warner's, he was just another writer looking for a hit movie on their resume. Harry and the Hendersons director William Deere soon came on board, taking the opportunity to demonstrate his ability to helm action set-piece movies. Looking back, you can see that Deere and Starr's brief involved giving the movie a sheen, making it slick, smooth out the edges compared to what we might have got from Dekker's potentially more interesting pitch, with fast cars, faster women, and a much less socially awkward protagonist, in the form of Grieco's Michael Corbin. Too busy partying in his senior year, Corbin is at risk of not graduating high school without passing French through a summer trip to Paris with the geeky French club. Lame. Corbin is mistaken for a murdered CIA agent of the same name, bumped up to first class for his flight, and has to become a spy himself, with all the James Bond mod cons. To stop an international crime empire led by Roger Rees and Linda Hunt, save his kidnapped teacher and classmates, and attempt to hook up with Gabrielle Anwar's Mariska, who wants revenge for the murder of her spy father Blade at the beginning of the movie, played by, wait, is that Roger Daltrey? If Looks Could Kill, as the film would eventually be retitled in the US, although I saw it in the UK as Teen Agent, substituted Quebec, Canada for Paris for filming, and wrapped by the end of summer 1990. By the time it was ready for release on March 15, 1991, the marketing leaned heavily on Grieco's still-to-be-tested star power, playing up his positioning as the new spy who everyone loved, while the 007 franchise was on an extended hiatus. If this was a hit, Grieco would be a force to be reckoned with. It, wasn't. Critics generally dismissed it, sometimes brutally, calling it insipid, tired, and full of gross kids, with a body count worthy of Rambo. If only it will, in turn, simply die at the box office. As the Los Angeles Times put it, if looks alone could kill, then the new teen thriller might be the movie it obviously wants to be, but it isn't. It didn't fare much better with audiences, failing to crack the top 10 in its opening weekend and underperforming compared to fellow newcomers Class Action, The Perfect Weapon, and Guilty by Suspicion, not to mention more established chart dwellers like Dances with Wolves and Home Alone. Failing to pick up any momentum the following week, Warner's would soon cut their losses, removing it from theaters altogether. Its feeble domestic box office gross of under $8 million meant that it would soon be tagged as a high-profile flop. Before too long, Grieco's Hollywood stock was crashing too. Booker had been cancelled after just one season, and soon his movie career wasn't faring much better. A few months after If Looks Could Kill had flatlined, Grieco's other major release of 1991, The Gangsters, played by teen heartthrob's crime flick Mobsters, in which our guy played Bugsy Siegel, arrived in cinemas. With Christian Slater and Patrick Dempsey also amongst the cast, Mobsters was marketed as a sort of Young Guns Goes Gangster, heavily pushed to a younger audience with the hopes of capitalizing on the new Hollywood aura of its leads. It opened at number 2 behind just Terminator 2 in July, but quickly dropped off and was savaged by critics. Mobsters, which Studio Universal had high hopes for, would, just like If Looks Could Kill, end up failing to make its budget back in cinemas and became Grieco's second flop of the year. As he remembers, Grieco turned down a lot of roles in the preceding years. This included rejecting the Keanu Reeves role in Speed, a move which he admits now was a mistake. He was soon reduced to making low-budget fare like A Vow to Kill and The Demolitionist. Grieco later went on to make music and had some success as a painter, but his time as a Hollywood hot commodity was particularly brief, a status he mocked in his cameo as himself in A Night at the Roxbury. I'll be honest with you, I turned down everything from probably 92 to 94. I looked at how the old actors worked. If it's not the right film, you just don't take a film. I didn't know you do film after film after film after film. In Hollywood, the opportunities were enormous, but unless you're a very rare case, you also had to play the game. Your moment in the spotlight could be over in the blink of an eye. Although, for If Looks Could Kill, there were flaws at the heart of the production that meant it was probably in trouble from the start. As original writer Decker reflected years later, the final product is not at all what I envisioned, not the least reason being they cast a cool guy to play the nerdy lead. I'm not a fan, but the movie has its moments. If Looks Could Kill did indeed, and does still, have its moments. Roger Ebert called it a guilty pleasure. It's not a terrible movie, Grieco isn't bad, but something is missing. Rewatching it back all these years later, there's a hollowness at the centre of it. It wasn't the lift-off moment for the character or the actor who played him, maybe in part because his whole presentation was just too cool. Although, was the film itself really cool? The MTV aesthetic was rapidly getting more grungy, and If Looks Could Kill looked extremely 80s by comparison. The soundtrack, which could have helped in the coolness factor, was headed up by a title track from late 80s and early 90s cheesemeister Glenn Medeiros. The song doesn't appear to have even been released as a single, but Medeiros will always be remembered here in the UK as the mystery guest on an episode of the pop song review show Jukebox Jury in 1990, when he was forced to appear from behind a bookshelf after the panelists had just finished absolutely slating his single without knowing that he was in the studio. Genuinely, one of the most cringeworthy, some might say incredible, moments in TV history.
Well, thank you very much for coming. I'm sorry everybody didn't like your record. There you go. Thank you. And you sure you don't want the Swiss and there we are. Thank you. Goodbye.
Anyway, back to If Looks Could Kill. A missed opportunity for a great concept and the beginning of the end for Richard Grieco's time as a potential Hollywood power player. In the end, If Looks Could Kill became a film that needed a little bit more soul. Coming up, a wildly ambitious Cool Britannia blockbuster attempt goes very, very wrong. A best-selling video game series sets its sights on Hollywood and misses by several light years. And up next, an attempt to turn a good fella into a bankable 90s action movie star hits the skids. For this sci-fi prison break drama's disappointing box office takings, there would be no escape. In a world where Hollywood needed a new generation of blockbuster headliners, one good fella riding the crest of a cinematic wave dared to step up to the plate. In a dystopian future, Prisoner 2675 was just looking to survive and be free. But for the man who played him, the potential impact could be far greater. But the one who really escaped from Absalom with most of the benefits was the film's director.
No escape.
You want it? Come and get it!
Rated R.
In the early 1990s, the hunt was on for a new crop of action movie stars. Moving beyond the archetypal icons of 80s cinema, studios cast the net wider to lock in bankable names for franchises and big budget fare. And after Goodfellas in 1990, there were few more high-profile candidates than Ray Liotta. Goodfellas hadn't been a huge hit in cinemas, but it had made money, and its legacy was soon secured as one of the greatest movies of modern American cinema. It had also been a true breakout moment for Liotta, who went from an established actor to one of Hollywood's very hottest names thanks to his performance in Martin Scorsese's masterpiece. He'd managed another hit in 1992 with Unlawful Entry, with Liotta as the crazed cop stalking Madeleine Stowe and Kurt Russell, and he was soon accepting a job he had always wanted, the lead role in a fairly big budget action movie. His career was potentially about to jump to the next level. No Escape had gone into production under the title Prison Colony, with producers Gail Ann Hurd and Jake Ebert making the call to fund it outside of the major studio system. As Hurd tells it, the majors were insistent that the film have at least some female cast members, which the producers thought would dilute its impact, so they chose to distribute it in North America via the upstart independent Savoy Pictures. A loose adaptation of the 1987 book The Penal Colony, No Escape took us to the dystopian world of 2022, where Liotta's Marine John Robbins is serving a life sentence in a prison system run by heartless corporations. He ends up being put on the prison island Absalom, which is inhabited by two groups of convicts, the Outsiders, headed up by Stuart Wilson's evil cult leader, and the Insiders, a far less savage group which includes Ernie Hudson and Lance Henriksen's peaceful leader. Caught up in the battles between the two groups and agreeing to help the Insiders, Robbins is also determined to escape from the super high security island, something nobody has ever been able to do before. The film went into production in the early summer of 1993, with Queensland and New South Wales, Australia serving as an ideal location for the island setting. Director Martin Campbell, originally from New Zealand, had moved to Britain in the 60s and started off making comedies with amazing titles like The Sex Thief. But he had loftier ambitions and, after directing a couple of thrillers in America, No Escape was his opportunity to show that he belonged at the blockbuster level. The only problem was, No Escape would prove far from a blockbuster upon its cinematic release, even if the early signs were relatively positive. Arriving in cinemas on April 29, 1994, it beat out fellow newcomers With Honors, PCU, and a Martin Lawrence stand-up film to reach #1 at the box office. But it wasn't exactly peak season, the takings weren't huge, and it would soon tumble down the charts and out of the audience's hearts. Critics were divided on the picture, generally appreciating the performances, but seeing the film as just another violent post-apocalyptic no-brainer. As the Washington Post review surmised, No Escape will appeal primarily for people who thought Mad Max 2: The Road Warrior was a tad too intellectual. It would make just $15 million domestically, with total worldwide takings a little over $22 million, far from the top of the leaderboard. I remember watching No Escape a lot back in the day, whether that was on a busted up old VHS tape or whenever it would randomly appear on TV. I'm pretty sure I have memories of it being on telly a lot here in the UK. And you know what? It does kind of hold up now. The handcrafted nature of the production is a really cool element. The beautiful Australian location adds to the overall package. The story allows for a little bit of societal commentary. Liotta is an engaging lead. The supporting performances are pretty solid, not least scenery-chewing bad guy Wilson, and it makes the most of its budget. It doesn't need to be nearly 2 hours long, but overall, this is exactly the kind of film we don't really see much anymore. And that's a shame. With that said, there's no getting away from the fact it wasn't a hit, and you can kind of understand why. It did, in many ways, feel like a holdover from the 80s, and came at a time when action movies were trending towards being larger, slicker, and more modern day in location and style. 1994 wasn't the right time for No Escape to hit cinemas. It would be the short-lived peak for the action hero phase of Ray Liotta's glittering career, but it would also prove an important calling card for director Campbell. His stint on Prison Island helped to convince the producers behind 007 that Campbell was the right man to bring James Bond back to cinemas, and he was soon installed as the director of the 17th installment, GoldenEye, which arrived in 1995, made a serious amount of cash, and placed the filmmaker in the upper echelon of Hollywood's pecking order. The forgotten film that put him on the Hollywood map, though, probably did deserve a fair amount better. No Escape might go down as a lost blockbuster, but if you ever need a sci-fi action Prison Island drama starring a good fella that features some pretty sick stunt work for some Friday night viewing, you could do far, far worse. On a Saturday morning in August of 1998, young Culture Slice and Culture Slice Senior arrived for a screening of a brand new, uniquely British-flavoured blockbuster. The money wasn't British, of course, that was American, but at least some of the stars and crew were. And it was a big screen reboot for an unbelievably British TV show from the 1960s that my dad had reliably informed me was huge at the time. It was 10 AM and I was sitting eating a homemade bacon sarnie in a cold, mostly empty cinema screen. There was nothing glamorous about it. Still though, I thought it was pretty cool. I'd loved going to the cinema with my dad at the weekend across the 90s, and we'd seen some true future classics together. Sadly though, the movie we were about to see was The Avengers. No, not that one. This one.
The Avengers.
I'm glad to hear they're together at last.
With Oscar-nominated leads, a former Bond as the villain, and a big studio budget, what could possibly go wrong? Well, as it turned out, absolutely everything. The Avengers in its original form had been one of the most iconic British TV shows of the swinging 60s. The series featured sharp suits, sharper women, and an undeniable grooviness, with dapper spy Steed and a succession of glamorous assistants, saving the world and looking good doing it. Some scenes might have been a bit too kinky for it to make the splash it could have in America, but in Britain at least, it had long been held up as a cultural artifact that encapsulated the era. Still, it felt like a slightly odd fit for a Hollywood makeover. Producer Jerry Weintraub, riding high off the success of The Karate Kid, had snapped up the film rights in the 1980s, convinced that it had the potential to be a special kind of undertaking, and he would be proved right, though perhaps not quite in the way he imagined. The project eventually got the green light at Warner Brothers in the mid-90s, and the timing seemed perfect. Cool Britannia was at its peak. The Spice Girls were a worldwide cultural phenomenon. Oasis was still just about holding it together, and British culture generally was having a major moment. So a Cool Britannia blockbuster could be seen as the next logical step. British screenwriter Don McPherson's script was soon to be put into the hands of director Jeremiah Chechik, who had made National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation and 1996's Diabolique for Warner's already, and saw this as a passion project. The dream would eventually turn to a nightmare for Chechik. Years later, he would call it the greatest disappointment of my career. Hang on, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Back in 1997, the pivotal casting of Steed and his assistant Emma Peel was the most pressing concern. Various high-profile names came and went before Ralph Fiennes became Steed and Uma Thurman was chosen as Emma Peel, both were Oscar-nominated but not consensus choices. Chechik fought particularly hard for Fiennes, who had established himself in Hollywood as a serious actor. The studio pushed for Thurman, despite the director recalling that her chemistry with Ralph was not there. There was also the fact that neither of them was a proven blockbuster headliner. In fact, by the time the film was released, the last big-budget movie Thurman had on her CV was Batman and Robin. The film would join secret agent John Steed and meteorologist Emma Peel as they worked together to stop a bizarre weather-based plan to take over the world, being enacted by August de Winter, a role which would eventually be played by Sean Connery. As Chechik remembers, the shoot, which took place at Pinewood Studios and across the southeast of England, largely went pretty smoothly for a $60 million budget mega movie, but everything fell apart in post-production. Chechik delivered his movie and the execs hated it. Test screenings went terribly. Warner's, whose new execs had no faith in the film, demanded considerable editing cuts. There were no advanced screenings for critics, which is never a good sign, and the release date was pushed back. The Avengers had gone from a wannabe blockbuster to damage control. It would eventually be rolled out on August 14th, 1998, and reviews were not kind. In the slightest. In amongst all of the vitriol, the phrase "worst film ever made" was used on occasion, from so horrendously, painfully, and thoroughly awful that it gives other cinematic clunkers like Ishtar and Howard the Duck a good name, to a stunningly designed blockbuster that's stunningly awful in every other department, and a dismal and misguided special effects romp featuring two of the deadest performances recorded this year, to simply, this film is an absolute mess. When it came to the audience reaction, fans of the series disliked the changes that had been made, and newcomers didn't have much of a clue what on earth was going on. The studio had demanded that the best part of an hour was cut from the film, including the original opening scene, and moments which established narrative links were removed with very little thought for the viewer. The leads had zero, bordering on negative chemistry. The entire film was washed with a dourness that didn't reflect the source material. Moments like Sean Connery and his fellow evildoers meeting up dressed as teddy bears might have sounded good in theory, but in practice they did little more than add surreal mascots to the whole sad exercise. It would open in third place behind fellow newcomers Saving Private Ryan and How Stella Got Her Groove Back, dropped 60% of its take-ins in week 2, and fully crashed out less than a month later. The Avengers made just $54.7 million worldwide, failing to make back its production budget before any other costs were added on top. it would be nominated across numerous Worst Movie and Acting awards over the following year, and Chechik, who has long stated the film that was released wasn't his movie, wouldn't make another film for 15 years. Despite the director saying he would work for free, Warners have never shown any interest in releasing a director's cut. It remains a bemusing cautionary tale. Obviously, the Avengers was made before the rise of artificial intelligence. This one, not this one, but it genuinely feels like it could have been made by AI. There's a bizarre, uncanny valley sense of nothingness to the movie. Everything is numb, stilted, and just awkward. The studio-enforced edits made it all far more incomprehensible. But watching it back for the first time in 25 years, it's clear from the footage that did make it that this wasn't ever going to be a masterpiece. It's difficult to understand who exactly this movie was made for, and in the end, it ended up being for nobody. The Avengers had a great cast, a big budget, and every opportunity to succeed. In theory at least, but it ended up mutilated through creative confusion and the Hollywood meat grinder. There would, of course, be no encore. By the end of 1998, Cool Britannia was over too. Jerry had left the Spice Girls, Britpop was no longer anything to write home about, and in cinemas, there was a monumental, high-profile flop that seemed to encapsulate its decline. The party was well and truly over. The 1990s, the decade of dial-up internet and AOL chat being the place to be, the true glory days of after-school TV, an era when it felt like top 40 chart battles really mattered, when wrestling was truly awesome, a time when Friday night trips to the video store meant everything. And of course, the years when young Culture Slice got Sky TV in his own room. But one thing that wasn't around in the 90s was the hype button, or in fact, YouTube itself for that matter. Anyway, if you're enjoying what we do here at Culture Slice, then you can swipe to the left in the comments to reveal the hype button and hit that up to 3 times a week to help this video and the channel grow. Now, let's get back to the video. Cowabunga, dudes! In the first few months of 1999, anticipation was building around the world for the arrival of a sci-fi film that would almost without question become the biggest cinematic moment of the year, an event so huge that the ticket sale and merchandise revenue was already in sight for ravenous studio execs. That film was Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace, a movie that was guaranteed to turn a huge profit and be loved by everyone. Yeah, one of those ended up being true. Anyway, at least The Phantom Menace was kind of memorable, which is more than can be said for the space opera wannabe franchise starter released 2 months before the new Star Wars film. Basically nobody would remember that. Video game movies were in a funny old place by the end of the 90s. Though there had been occasional bright spots, they were soon snuffed out, and for the most part, Hollywood's attempts to translate huge selling games to the big screen had built up a terrible reputation. Most people involved, though, seemed to think that Wing Commander would be different. Not least the director of the movie, who also happened to be the creator of the wildly popular simulator game series. The choice of director was a move which might have seemed like a good one at the time for Studio 20th Century Fox, but ended up being one which, yeah, maybe wasn't. The original Wing Commander had been pretty revolutionary upon release at the beginning of the decade, taking PC gaming to a new level of detail and immersion. It quickly became the definitive space combat game, spawning a number of big selling sequels and introducing cinematic storytelling into the genre. Later entries included live action scenes featuring actual Mark Hamill. It also made a lot of money. By the mid-90s, the games had generated over over $100 million. It was a valuable asset with franchise potential beyond gaming, so it wasn't hard to see why Fox thought it could ride the wave of Star Wars anticipation. Roberts, once in place as the movie's director, was full of confidence as he entered production. I agree that most games to movies have been spotty. The bottom line is you need a good story and compelling characters. Of course, I'm biased, but I believe Wing Commander has both. I was glad now that I directed the live action scenes in the game. It was good training for me. He soon found out though that shooting a few scenes for inclusion in a game was a different kettle of fish to making a major studio movie. The constrained budget, which eventually crept up towards $25 million, meant that much of the movie took place within the spaceships themselves, with the director aiming for a tense, claustrophobic Das Boot vibe, which never quite materialized. The film's short turnaround time to meet the release deadline added to the pressure. Kevin Droney's script was tweaked and tinkered with, and pre-production lasted just 3 months, with post also being incredibly tight for a movie with a heavy CGI presence. But Fox wanted it in cinemas in spring '99, come hell or high water. They had also secured a teen idol as the lead, with Freddie Prinze Jr. cast after making his name in insanely profitable films like I Know What You Did Last Summer and She's All That. This was his shot at becoming a blockbuster movie star. Inspired by the first Wing Commander game and set in the year 2654, with Prinze Jr.'s young fighter pilot alongside co-stars Matthew Lillard and Saffron Burrows as part of a crew fighting an intergalactic battle against the Kilrathi, an alien race at war with humanity. Despite the ambitious deadlines, Wing Commander was delivered in time for release on March 12, 1999, 2 months before The Phantom Menace, exactly as planned. The only problem was, it would also be long gone from cinemas well before Star Wars Episode 1 had come close to arriving. Rolling out in over 2,000 cinemas, the film could only reach number 7 in its opening weekend, before dropping out of the top 10 entirely the following week. By early April, it was down at number 55 in the box office charts, with The Matrix, which had arrived at the end of March, taking all of the blockbuster spotlight. One of its few draws, as reports had it at the time, was that it featured a Phantom Menace trailer beforehand. Some audiences apparently watched the trailer and walked straight out before the movie began. Wing Commander would generate just over $11 million domestically, nowhere near its production budget. It would go down as a notable late 90s flop if only people could remember it even happened in the first place. Critics labelled it dopey, with a plot with all the depth and originality of a video game, without the fun of the interactivity. The Washington Post called it a cinematic sleeping pill, and the New York Times said the film is painfully boring and funny in the wrong places. Rewatching it for this video, one thing was for sure, it was definitely boring. There would be no redemption story in international markets, and no film franchise for Wing Commander. For his part, Roberts has been pretty honest in his assessment of the movie's failure, telling a Wing Commander fan site in 2012 that it came down to a number of factors. His own inexperience as a director for such a complex project, a budget that couldn't fully realise the vision, not least on the rendering of the Kilrathi, which he accepted sucked. Fox's insistence on releasing before The Phantom Menace, the decision to take the visuals away from the look of the game, and having a producer in Todd Moyer without the necessary hands-on creative knowledge to support a new director. He would later channel the experience into becoming a producer himself in the 2000s, with credits including Lord of War, Lucky Number 11, and Who's Your Caddy, which, yeah, wasn't exactly Caddyshack. He's also crowdfunded a new game called Star Citizen, which has raised more than $1 billion for its development so far, but has no confirmed release date more than a decade after being announced. Freddie Prinze Jr.'s take was even more blunt. "I can't stand Wing Commander. I can't watch one scene of that movie. I read the script and loved it. So did my buddy Matthew Lillard. We both got the parts. We went on location and they said, here's the new script. It was a piece of The film, unsurprisingly, didn't transform him into a long-term blockbuster leading man. After appearing in the Scooby-Doo movies with Lillard, he largely stepped away from major roles and got a job in the WWE creative team. He also married Sarah Michelle Gellar, so overall, he's done alright. As for the film Wing Commander had hoped to ride the coattails of, The Phantom Menace broke numerous box office records and passed $1 billion worldwide. The film itself though, I can't remember a time I've been more disappointed leaving a cinema. But when writing this, I had no memory of even leaving the cinema after watching Wing Commander. Actually, that might be because I didn't get the chance to. It was considered such a dud that it barely got a big screen rollout in the UK before quickly being released on video and DVD. Maybe being forgettable really is the worst crime a wannabe blockbuster can commit, because for all its ambition, Wing Commander didn't just fail, it vanished. And that was something all four of the seemingly very different movies we've covered tonight had in common. Each one hoped to be the spark that lit a far bigger flame. Sequels, superstar pay packets, spin-offs, whatever the objective, they all hoped to be the catalyst for something more. But whether it was deserved or not, every one of them crash-landed shortly after takeoff. Then again, that was kind of par for the course, because in Hollywood in the 90s, failure to launch was an occupational hazard. Thankfully, here at Culture Slice Towers, we've got a few launches of our own coming up soon, although these ones will be into the equally unpredictable world of the YouTube algorithm. Next up on the main channel, we're getting funky on the beach for the return of Sequel Palooza, before that series also makes its wet and wild debut over on our second channel, Culture Slice Cuts, and we'll soon be diving headfirst into the murky world of turning pixels into cinematic gold. Or maybe make that bronze? Tin maybe? Anyway, if you like what we do, then make sure you're subscribed with notifications on for both channels so you don't miss a release, and to show YouTube that Culture Slice is worth supporting. As always, thanks for watching, and of course, save Ferris.